The car keys weren't on the hall table. I distinctly remembered placing them right beside the small chipped porcelain bowl where we always kept them. My name is Elena, and for the past month, ever since my grandmother Eleanor passed, my life has felt like a badly written play where I was the only one who hadn't read the script. Looking for these, love? Duncan's voice, smooth as honey, startled me. He dangled the keys from his finger, a small, indulgent smile on his face. He'd been standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me pat down my pockets with growing frustration. Oh, yes, I could have sworn I left them. You've been a bit forgetful lately, he said, stepping forward to drop the keys into my palm. His hand lingered on mine, a touch that was meant to be comforting, but lately felt more like a brand. It's understandable, with everything you've been through. Everything I'd been through was losing Eleanor, the woman who had raised me, my anchor, my wisest counsel. The inheritance she'd left me was significant, a testament to her hard work and shrewd investments, but it was her absence that carved the real void. Duncan, my husband of 5 years, had been a pillar of something. Concern mostly. So much concern. You just rest, Eleanor, he'd murmur, guiding me to the sofa when I'd paused too long by the window. Don't you worry about a thing. He'd taken over paying the bills, making appointments, even answering my phone sometimes, telling callers I was not quite up to talking. Did Mrs. Henderson call back about the Garden Society meeting? I asked one afternoon, trying to cling to some semblance of my normal routine. Duncan frowned, tapping his chin. Mrs. Henderson? No, I don't think so, darling. Are you sure she was meant to call today? You know how your memory has been a little foggy? I was sure. Or I had been. Now, a sliver of doubt pricked at me. Eleanor's voice, a memory sharp and clear, echoed in my mind. Pay attention to the little things, Elena. Men who want to control you start by controlling what you believe. She'd said that years ago, long before Duncan, but it resonated now with an unnerving clarity. The gaslighting, as I'd later learned to call it, was subtle at first. Misplaced items that he'd find for me with a sigh. Gentle corrections to my recollections of conversations. He'd look at me with such profound, sorrowful worry that I'd started to question myself. Was grief really doing this to me? Was I losing my grip? His sister Jade had started visiting more frequently too. She'd arrive with casseroles and platitudes, her eyes, so like Duncan's, flicking around the house Eleanor had left me, lingering on the antique furniture, the paintings. You poor thing, Jade cooed one afternoon, patting my hand. It's just too much for you to handle all this. Duncan is so worried. We all are. Her sympathy felt as synthetic as the cheap perfume she wore. The turning point came on a Tuesday. I was in our bedroom, supposedly napping, though sleep had become a fickle friend. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard Duncan's voice from the hallway, lower than usual, confidential. He was on the phone. No, she's resting. Completely unhinged, Jade, I'm telling you. Crying 1 minute, staring into space the next. It's getting worse. A pause. My breath caught in my throat. Unhinged? Exactly, he continued, his voice dropping further, but I could still hear the venomous edge. That inheritance, it's substantial. It needs protecting. From herself, obviously. We can't let her just squander it or, well, you know. I strained to hear Jade's tinny reply, but couldn't make out the words. Then Duncan spoke again, and this time his voice was laced with something ugly, something triumphant. Don't worry, sis, I've got a plan. A proper one. By the time I'm done, everyone will see she's not capable. It's for her own good, really. I risked a peek through the crack in the door. He was leaning against the wall, phone pressed to his ear, and as he listened to Jade, a slow, predatory smirk spread across his face. It was a look I'd never seen on him before, and it chilled me to the bone. He actually smirked, like a villain in a cheap play. He hung up, the smirk still playing on his lips. He thought I was oblivious, lost in my grief, an easy target. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a sudden, cold fury. He thought I was unravelling. He had no idea Grandmother Eleanor had spent years warning me about men like him, men who smiled while sharpening their knives. She'd prepared me for this very storm. Let him think he's winning, I thought. a grim resolve settling over me. The show is just about to begin, and he wouldn't be the one directing it. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Duncan's concern became a suffocating blanket. My favourite pearl earrings, a gift from Eleanor, vanished from my jewellery box. "Are you sure you didn't put them somewhere else, darling?" Duncan asked, his brow furrowed with that now familiar look of pity. "You know how you've been misplacing things?" He found them a day later, tucked inside a teacup in the kitchen cupboard. "See? Just a little muddled," he said, patting my arm. I forced a weak smile, my stomach churning. I hadn't been near that cupboard. He started answering my calls more frequently, especially from my friend Chiara. "Elena's just resting, Chiara," I heard him say one afternoon, his voice dripping with false solicitude. "She's not really up to chatting. The grief, you know, it's hitting her very hard." When I later asked why he hadn't told me Chiara called, he looked surprised. "Oh, did I forget to mention it? So sorry, love. My mind must be elsewhere too, worrying about you." I began keeping a small, discreet notebook, tucked under my mattress. In it, I meticulously recorded every incident, the misplaced items, the conversations he forgot, the times he subtly contradicted me in front of others. June the 5th. Dee claimed I left the stove on. I hadn't cooked all day. He turned it off for me. June 7th. Dee told Mrs. Gable I'd forgotten our lunch date. I never made one. The list grew longer each day. Jade's visits became more pointed. She'd arrive unannounced, usually when Duncan was at work, though I suspected he was often just not here. "Elena, sweetie," she said one morning, her eyes scanning the living room, "you really should let Duncan handle the finances. All those papers and numbers. It must be terribly overwhelming for you right now." She gestured vaguely towards the antique secretary desk, where Eleanor had kept her affairs meticulously organised. "I'm managing," I said, my voice deliberately flat. "Are you, though?" Jade pressed, her voice syrupy. "Duncan was saying you seemed confused about the electricity bill the other day. He had to sort it all out for you." A lie. I'd paid it online myself the previous week. "Duncan is very helpful," I replied, offering nothing more. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "He just wants what's best for you. We both do. It's such a shame Eleanor isn't here. She'd know what to do to support you." The implication hung heavy in the air. "Support you into an institution, perhaps?" Eleanor's words echoed again. "When they try to make you small, stand taller, even if only on the inside at first." I knew I needed more than a notebook. I needed an ally. The next morning, I called Wyatt. He'd been Eleanor's lawyer for decades, a sharp, no-nonsense man who'd always treated me with kindness. "Wyatt," I said, keeping my voice light, "it's Elena. I was hoping to come in and discuss some aspects of grandmother's estate, just to make sure I understand everything properly." "Of course, Elena," he replied, his tone professional but warm. "How about tomorrow afternoon? 3 o'clock?" "Perfect," I said. "Thank you." When Duncan came home that evening, he found me staring blankly at the television, a half-eaten plate of toast on the coffee table. I'd deliberately mussed my hair and smudged my mascara slightly. "Rough day, love?" he asked, his voice oozing sympathy. I nodded mutely, letting a tear escape and trail down my cheek. He sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulder. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone serious, "and I know this might be hard to hear, but I'm really worried about you, Elena." I looked up at him, my eyes wide and questioning. This fog you're in, the forgetfulness, the sadness, it's more than just grief, I think." He paused, stroking my hair. "I know a specialist, a really good doctor, Dr. Peterson. He helps people who are struggling. Maybe it would be a good idea for you to just talk to him. For your own good, of course, to help you get back on your feet." His eyes searched mine, looking for agreement, for surrender. I let my gaze drop, feigning a weary confusion. "A doctor?" I murmured, as if the thought were overwhelming. I don't know, Duncan. Just think about it, love," he said softly, kissing my forehead. "He could really help." A flicker of something, a plan, a countermove, sparked behind my eyes. He mistook it for the vacant stare he was so keen to cultivate. "Okay," I whispered. I'll think about it." He smiled. A genuine, satisfied smile this time. He thought he was one step closer to his goal. He had no idea I was already miles ahead, laying my own path. Duncan's Dr. Peterson was undoubtedly someone handpicked to rubber stamp his narrative of my supposed decline. I wasn't about to walk into that ambush. The morning after his suggestion, while he was in the shower, I was online. Eleanor had always valued thorough research. Never take the first offer, Elena, or the first opinion, especially if it's offered too freely. My search for psychiatrists in the city was meticulous. I looked for credentials, patient reviews, and any articles or papers they'd published. Dr. Isla Joseph's name kept appearing. Renowned, ethical, with a reputation for being incredibly astute. Perfect. I booked an appointment for the following week, using my personal credit card, the one Duncan didn't know about, and an email address he couldn't access. My next move was to turn the tables on Duncan's carefully constructed image of the responsible, worried husband. He was usually so fastidious about shredding documents, but lately, in his growing arrogance, he'd become careless. While he was out for one of his increasingly long errands, I went into his home office, a room I rarely entered. Tucked under a pile of sporting magazines in his bottom desk drawer, I found them. Credit card statements. Not for our joint account, but for one in his name only. My breath hitched. The balances were staggering. Thousands spent at high-end electronic stores, online gambling sites, even a charge for a gentleman's club that made my stomach clench. This wasn't just frivolous spending. This was reckless, desperate. So much for his concern over my ability to manage Eleanor's inheritance. He was clearly in a financial hole of his own digging. I carefully photographed each statement with my phone, then replaced them exactly as I'd found them. The study, Eleanor's old sanctuary, became my next focus. It was where Duncan often took private calls, pacing back and forth. I'd purchased a tiny voice-activated audio recorder, no bigger than my thumb, the kind journalists used. After dinner one evening, while Duncan was engrossed in a football match, I slipped into the study. My hands trembled slightly as I secreted the device behind a row of leather-bound classics on the bookshelf, angling it towards his preferred pacing spot near the window. It felt like planting a bomb. A few days later, my carefully constructed act of fragility was in full swing. I forgot where I'd parked the car at the grocery store, leading to a frantic, on my part, and deeply concerned, on Duncan's part, search. I accidentally put salt instead of sugar in his coffee, then burst into tears of frustration at my own incompetence. "It's okay, love, it's okay," he soothed, but his eyes held a glint of something else. Impatience? Triumph? That evening, I was in the kitchen, ostensibly trying to follow a simple recipe and making a mess of it, when I heard his voice from the study. The door was ajar. He was on the phone, his tone hushed but excited. "Yeah, Jade. It's all falling into place. She's completely losing it. It's almost too easy." My heart pounded. This was it. "I've got the assessment lined up," he continued. "Next Tuesday. Found 2 perfect professionals, Dr. Smith and a Ms. Walton. They come highly recommended for delicate situations." He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "They'll see what I see. What everyone will see soon enough." I clutched the counter, my knuckles white. The small, inert recorder in my pocket suddenly felt like a live wire. Perfect indeed, I thought, a grim, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. He was walking right into the web I was weaving, thread by careful thread. He was so focused on my supposed unravelling that he couldn't see his own. The recorder sat innocuously on the bookshelf for 2 more days. I checked its battery, my movements furtive, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs every time Duncan entered the study. Then, on Saturday morning, he took a long call. I busied myself in the garden, my ears straining. But it was Jade's arrival later that afternoon that provided the gold. They thought I was upstairs, resting. I'd made a show of being particularly exhausted after lunch. Instead, I was perched at the top of the stairs, just out of sight. The baby monitor I'd found in the attic, another of Eleanor's prescient purchases, years ago for visiting great-nieces, tuned to the study's frequency. The recorder was my primary, but redundancy was key. So, Tuesday is D-Day. Jade's voice, sharp and avaricious, crackled through the monitor. Today, for our dear Elena's sanity, yes, Duncan replied, and I could hear the smirk in his tone. Dr. Smith and Ms. Walton are briefed. They understand the sensitivities. The main thing is to emphasize her emotional lability, her confusion, the memory lapses. And the spending, Jade asked. We need to make sure they know she's incapable of managing that fortune. Oh, I've got that covered, Duncan said smoothly. I'll mention how she's been talking about wanting to donate huge sums to obscure cat charities, how she tried to buy a sports car she can't even drive. Little things that paint the picture. My blood ran cold. He was manufacturing outright lies. And once they declare her incompetent, Jade's voice was practically purring. Then I, as her loving husband, step in to manage her affairs, protect her from herself, and from those vultures who'll try to take advantage. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Honestly, Jade, it's a relief. Those debts I mentioned, this will clear everything up. We'll finally be comfortable. Debts. So the credit card statements were just the tip of the iceberg. This wasn't just about greed. It was about desperation. His desperation. Jade giggled, a sound like ice chips clinking. Poor, fragile Elena. It's almost a kindness what we're doing. The cruelty in her voice, the casual dismissal of my life, my future, for their financial gain, solidified every ounce of resolve within me. I retrieved the recorder later that evening, my hand steady. The recording was crystal clear. My appointment with Dr. Isla Joseph was the following Monday. She was a calm, incisive woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanour. I didn't play the victim. I laid out the facts. Eleanor's death, Duncan's escalating campaign of gaslighting, the overheard conversations, the financial irregularities I'd uncovered. I spoke for nearly 2 hours. She listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. And how has this behaviour from your husband made you feel, Elena? Initially, confused and scared, I admitted. Now, angry and determined. By the end of our session, Dr. Joseph was unequivocal. Eleanor, she said, her gaze direct, you are under immense psychological stress, directly attributable to your husband's manipulative and emotionally abusive behaviour. However, you are by no means mentally incompetent. In fact, your clarity and methodical approach in handling this situation are indicative of remarkable resilience and cognitive function. She provided me with a comprehensive, notarized report detailing her findings. It was my shield, my irrefutable proof of sanity. That afternoon, I met Wyatt. I played him the recording of Duncan and Jade. His normally impassive face tightened, his eyes flashing with anger as their venomous words filled his office. The unmitigated gall, he muttered when it finished. I then handed him copies of Duncan's credit card statements and Dr. Joseph's report. He's planning to have me assessed by his own professionals tomorrow, Wyatt. He intends to have me declared incompetent. Wyatt's expression was grim. He won't succeed, Elena, not with this. He tapped the report and the recorder. This is conspiracy to defraud at the very least. That evening, Duncan approached me, his face a mask of tender concern. Elena, darling, he said, taking my hands. Remember I mentioned Dr. Smith and Ms. Walton? They're able to come tomorrow for that informal chat, just to see how they can help you through this. His eyes, however, held a predatory gleam, a hunter's anticipation. Oh, I said, feigning a weary resignation. Tomorrow. All right, Duncan. If you think it will help. He squeezed my hands. I know it will, love. I know it will. He had no idea what kind of help was truly on its way. The morning of the assessment dawned grey and heavy, mirroring the knot in my stomach. But beneath the anxiety was a cold, hard core of anticipation. Today, the charade would end. I spent the morning in a carefully orchestrated display of distress. I wandered the house aimlessly, picking things up and putting them down again, as if I couldn't remember their purpose. I forgot what I was saying mid-sentence twice, while Duncan was in the room. He watched me with a mixture of feigned pity and ill-concealed satisfaction. "Are you sure you're up to this today, Elena?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern as I listlessly pushed food around my plate at breakfast. "We can always reschedule if you're not feeling strong enough." No, I murmured, looking down. It's probably for the best, to get some help." I let my voice tremble just enough. He patted my hand. "That's my brave girl." I retreated to our bedroom, ostensibly to rest before the visitors arrived. Instead, I meticulously reviewed my arsenal. The small digital recorder, queued up to the most damning part of Duncan and Jade's conversation, lay in my dressing gown pocket. A copy of Dr. Joseph's notarized report was tucked into a plain manila envelope. The printed copies of Duncan's credit card statements and the notes on his hidden debts were in another. My phone was fully charged. I sent a brief text to Wyatt. "Showtime is 2 p.m. Are you ready?" His reply was instantaneous. "Standing by, Elena. Give them hell." A grim smile touched my lips. That was precisely the plan. Duncan, meanwhile, was practically preening. He hummed as he moved about the house, making sure everything was just so. He even straightened a slightly crooked picture frame in the hallway, a task he'd ignored for months. He was a man on the verge of a great victory, and his arrogance was palpable. He treated me with an exaggerated gentleness, like one might handle a fragile, unpredictable child. "Just relax, darling," he said, popping his head into the bedroom. "Dr. Smith and Ms. Walton are very understanding. There's nothing to be afraid of." "Okay, Duncan," I whispered, pulling the covers higher, feigning nervousness. Around noon, the phone rang. Duncan answered it in the hallway, his voice low. I strained to hear but couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, he came back to the bedroom door. "That was Jade," he said, a little too casually. "Just calling to see how you were doing. She sends her love." Liar. I knew Jade. She wasn't calling to send love. She was calling for a status update on her investment. Later, while Duncan was in his study, presumably making last-minute calls to his professionals, I picked up the kitchen extension phone, my heart thudding. I'd seen him dial Jade's number earlier. With trembling fingers, I silently pressed the redial button. It connected on the second ring. "And you're sure she's properly softened up?" Jade's voice sharp and eager. "Like butter, sis," Duncan chuckled. "She's barely coherent, keeps forgetting things, crying over nothing. The doctors will take one look at her and know I'm right. Is our little gold mine ready to be cracked open?" "Just about," Duncan replied, his voice smug. "By this evening we should have a clear path to ensuring Elena's security." The line went dead as Jade presumably hung up. I carefully replaced the receiver, the phrase "little gold mine" echoing in my ears, fueling the icy fire in my veins. They saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Duncan straightened his tie, his face arranging itself into a mask of solemn concern. He glanced at me, where I sat huddled on the sofa, looking pale and disoriented. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a director cueing his tragic actress. He opened the door. "Dr. Smith, Ms. Walton, please come in. Thank you so much for coming." His voice was grave, but as he turned to usher them into the living room, his eyes met mine over their shoulders. There was a triumphant glint in them, a flash of pure, unadulterated greed. "Elena, darling," he said, his voice soft and solicitous. "Dr. Peter Smith and Ms. Michaela Walton are here for that assessment?" The game was on. Dr. Peter Smith was a portly man in his 50s with a carefully neutral expression that didn't quite mask a certain smugness. Ms. Michaela Walton, younger and sharper-featured, carried a leather satchel and surveyed the room with cool, appraising eyes. They exuded an air of professional gravity, but there was something rehearsed about it. "Mrs. Gardner," Dr. Smith began, his voice a gentle rumble. "Thank you for agreeing to see us. Your husband has expressed some serious concerns about your well-being, and we're just here to talk, to understand how we might be able to help." I nodded mutely, twisting a handkerchief in my lap, my gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond his left shoulder. I made sure to look lost, fragile. Duncan launched into his performance. It's just been so difficult since her grandmother passed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He gestured towards me with a helpless air. She's not herself, forgetting things constantly, important things, appointments, conversations. Sometimes she doesn't even seem to know what day it is. He recounted the misplaced keys, the forgotten calls, the confusion over bills, all the little incidents he'd so carefully orchestrated, now presented as evidence of my deteriorating mind. And her moods, he continued, shaking his head sadly. 1 minute she's weepy, the next she's staring blankly. She barely eats. I'm at my wits' end, doctors. I just want my Eleanor back. He even managed to squeeze out a tear, dabbing at his eye with a knuckle. It was a truly masterful performance of a grief-stricken, worried husband. Ms. Walton opened her satchel and took out a notepad. Mrs. Gardner, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, can you tell us how you've been feeling lately? I looked at her, my eyes wide and unfocused. Tired, I whispered. Just very tired and sad. Eleanor, I miss Eleanor. Of course, grief is a powerful emotion, Dr. Smith interjected smoothly, but your husband mentions a level of confusion that goes beyond normal grieving. For instance, he says you've had trouble recalling recent events. Is that true? I hesitated, looking from him to Duncan, then back again. Sometimes, I mumbled, things get jumbled. I let my voice trail off, picking at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. And your plans for the future, Mrs. Gardner? Ms. Walton asked. Your husband mentioned you've been talking about making some rather impulsive financial decisions, large donations, expensive purchases you don't need. This was Duncan's fabricated narrative about cat charities and sports cars. I blinked slowly. Money? I said, as if the concept were foreign. Eleanor left. She left things. It's a lot. I pressed my fingers to my temples. It's all so confusing. Duncan leaned forward, his expression earnest. You see, she can't even discuss it coherently. Just last week, she was adamant about wanting to buy a red convertible. She doesn't even have a driver's license anymore, hasn't driven in years. A blatant lie. I drove regularly, but I just looked down, offering no correction, letting his words hang in the air, damning me further in their eyes. Jade, who had apparently been invited to bolster the narrative, chose this moment to pipe up from the armchair where she'd been sitting silently, a picture of concerned, sisterly support. It's true, doctors. We're all so worried. She was talking about giving all her grandmother's jewellery to a stranger she met on the bus. It's just not like her. More lies. My grandmother's jewellery was securely in a bank vault, a fact Duncan knew perfectly well. The assessors exchanged a significant look. Dr. Smith cleared his throat. Mrs. Gardner, your husband also mentioned you've been neglecting your personal care, forgetting to eat, not sleeping well. I try, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I allowed a tear to trace a path down my cheek. I looked as broken and vulnerable as I possibly could. I needed them to believe I was on the verge of complete collapse, to fully commit to their diagnosis. Duncan watched me, his face a mask of sorrow, but I caught the flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had me. He thought this was the final act. Dr. Smith leaned forward, his voice taking on a graver tone. He exchanged another pointed glance with Ms. Walton. Mrs. Gardner, he said, his voice filled with professional solemnity. Based on your husband's detailed account of your behaviour, your sister-in-law's corroboration, and our own observations here today, we believe an urgent intervention may be necessary. Ms. Walton nodded in agreement. This is to ensure your well-being, of course, she added, and to safeguard your estate, which you currently seem unable to manage. Duncan could barely conceal his smirk. He looked like a cat that had not only cornered the canary, but had already swallowed it whole. He thought he'd won. He had no idea the real performance was about to begin. The smirk on Duncan's face was the cue I'd been waiting for. The air in the room was thick with his impending victory. Dr. Smith was already reaching into his briefcase, likely for the paperwork that would begin the process of stripping me of my autonomy. I took a slow, deliberate breath. Then I straightened up. The hunched, defeated posture vanished. I met Dr. Smith's gaze, my own now clear and icily calm. The transformation was so abrupt, it visibly startled him. "Before you recommend any intervention, doctors," I said, my voice steady and resonant, no longer the weak whisper they'd been hearing, "there's something you all need to hear." Duncan's smirk faltered. A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Eleanor, darling, what are you—" I ignored him, my eyes locked on his. I reached into my dressing gown pocket and pulled out the small digital recorder. "I believe this will be very illuminating." With a decisive click, I pressed play. The room filled with Duncan's voice, then Jade's, their hushed, conspiratorial tones amplified. "Completely unhinged, Jade, I'm telling you. That inheritance, it needs protecting. From herself, obviously. By the time I'm done, everyone will see she's not capable." Duncan's face went from ruddy to pale in seconds. Jade, across the room, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The recording continued, relentless. Dr. Smith and Ms. Walton are briefed. They understand the sensitivities. Dr. Smith and Ms. Walton exchanged horrified glances. The colour drained from Ms. Walton's face, while Dr. Smith's turned a blotchy red. "Those debts I mentioned. This will clear everything up. We'll finally be comfortable. Poor, fragile Elena. It's almost a kindness what we're doing. Is our little gold mine ready to be cracked open?" When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Duncan stared at the recorder in my hand as if it were a viper. Jade looked like she was about to be physically sick. "An informal chat, you called it, Duncan?" I asked, my voice dripping sarcasm. "Or was it a meticulously planned conspiracy to defraud me of my inheritance and falsely commit me?" Dr. Smith sputtered. "Mrs. Gardner, we had no idea. We were acting on the information provided by your husband." "Information?" I cut him off, my voice rising. "Or a carefully crafted script. Perhaps you'd be interested in a second opinion." I reached for the manila envelope and pulled out Dr. Isla Joseph's notarized report. "This is from Dr. Isla Joseph, a psychiatrist whose reputation, I assure you, is impeccable. She finds me perfectly sane, though under considerable stress due to my husband's attentions." I tossed the report onto the coffee table in front of them. Ms. Walton snatched it up, her hands trembling as she scanned the pages. Dr. Smith peered over her shoulder, his earlier composure completely shattered. "And speaking of finances," I continued, my gaze returning to Duncan, who now looked like a trapped animal. I produced the second envelope. "It seems the only one unhinged by money here is my husband." I scattered copies of his credit card statements across the table, the gambling debts, the extravagant purchases, the gentleman's club. Massive undisclosed debts. A desperate man, wouldn't you say, doctors? Desperate enough to try and steal his wife's inheritance? I stood up. "My lawyer, Wyatt, has copies of all of this. The recording, Dr. Joseph's report, Duncan's financial mess. He has already filed for divorce on my behalf, citing emotional abuse and financial malfeasance. He is also preparing to press charges against both my husband and my dear sister-in-law for conspiracy to defraud." Jade let out a small, strangled gasp. "Oh, and Dr. Smith?" I added, turning to the now sweating psychiatrist. "Wyatt also found some rather interesting information regarding previous inquiries into your ethical practices. Something about misdiagnoses for financial gain? I'm sure you wouldn't want another such inquiry, would you?" Dr. Smith looked like he was about to faint. He shot to his feet. "This is outrageous! We were misled! We are leaving!" Ms. Walton was already stuffing papers back into her satchel, her face pale. "We had no part in any scheme." Duncan finally found his voice, a torrent of furious denials and accusations erupting from him. "She's lying. She's the crazy one. This is all a trick. You can't believe her." Jade just stared, her face a mask of stunned, horrified silence. Dr. Smith and Ms. Walton practically tripped over each other in their haste to get to the door, muttering apologies and disavowals. They fled the house as if it were on fire. I watched them go, a cold, hard satisfaction settling deep within me. Duncan was still raving, pointing a shaking finger at me. The real assessment, I said quietly, my voice cutting through his tirade, is just beginning, Duncan. The departure of the assessors left a vacuum in the room, quickly filled by Duncan's sputtering rage and Jade's silent, ashen-faced terror. You bitch, Duncan finally roared, his face contorted. You set us up. This is all your twisted game. My game? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Or yours, Duncan? The one where you gaslight your grieving wife, try to steal her inheritance, and have her declared mentally incompetent? That game? The doorbell rang again, a sharp, decisive chime that cut through Duncan's tirade. He froze. I, however, smiled. That will be Wyatt, I said calmly. With the police, I imagine? For you, Duncan. And for you too, Jade. Jade let out a choked sob and sank further into the armchair, covering her face with her hands. Duncan's bluster deflated instantly, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. He looked towards the front door, as if it were the gallows. Wyatt entered, followed by 2 uniformed officers. His expression was grimly professional. Duncan Gardner, Jade Gardner, Wyatt said, his voice devoid of emotion. You are both being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit fraud. The officers stepped forward. Duncan didn't resist, as one of them informed him of his rights and cuffed his hands behind his back. He looked utterly defeated, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route that no longer existed. Jade was weeping openly now, a pathetic, broken figure, as the second officer gently but firmly led her to her feet. You'll regret this, Eleanor, Duncan spat as they led him away. You'll be alone. No one will want you after this. Alone and in control of my own life and finances, Duncan, I replied, my voice steady. It's a trade I'm more than willing to make. The aftermath was swift and brutal, just as Wyatt had predicted. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording, Dr. Joseph's report, Duncan's own damning financial records. It painted an undeniable picture of greed and calculated cruelty. The divorce was expedited. Duncan, facing criminal charges and financial ruin, had no leverage to contest anything. He lost the house, which had always been in my name thanks to Eleanor's foresight. He lost any claim to my inheritance. His reputation was in tatters. Friends and colleagues, once sympathetic to the poor, worried husband, recoiled in horror when the truth emerged. Jade fared little better. While she avoided jail time by cooperating fully and testifying against Duncan, her social standing evaporated. The family, initially shocked, soon saw the depth of her complicity. She became an outcast, her name synonymous with betrayal. The little gold mine she'd so eagerly anticipated cracking open had exploded in her face. I reclaimed my life, piece by piece. The house felt lighter, cleaner, without Duncan's oppressive presence. Tiara, horrified but fiercely supportive when I finally told her everything, became a frequent visitor, her presence a balm. There were scars, of course. The betrayal cut deep, a wound that would take time to heal. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more myself. A few weeks after Duncan's arrest, I sat in Eleanor's study, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. Wyatt was with me, going over some final paperwork. The Crown Prosecution Service is confident about a conviction for Duncan, Wyatt said, stacking a pile of documents neatly. Attempted fraud, conspiracy, he's looking at significant jail time. Jade got off lighter, but her life is effectively ruined. I nodded. There was a grim satisfaction in it, a sense of karmic justice served cold. They had tried to destroy me, to label me unhinged, and now those labels rightly belonged to them, their lives shattered by their own avarice. Eleanor would be proud of you, Elena, Wyatt said softly, looking at me with a respect that warmed me from the inside out. She always knew you were stronger than you thought. Tears pricked my eyes, but these were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of release, of vindication. I looked around the study, at Eleanor's books, her desk, the faint scent of her favourite lavender polish still lingering in the air. She had prepared me, not just with warnings, but with the strength and intelligence she had nurtured in me. I want to set up a foundation, Wyatt, I said, a new idea taking root. In Eleanor's name, something to help others, people who faced what I faced, victims of elder abuse, financial exploitation, gaslighting. Wyatt smiled. A fitting tribute and a testament to your victory. Revenge had been a powerful motivator, a necessary fire to forge my path through the darkness Duncan had created. But my true triumph wasn't just in his downfall. It was in my freedom, in Eleanor's vindicated trust, and in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had faced down calculated cruelty and won. Not by becoming like them, but by being smarter, more prepared, and ultimately by staying true to the strength Eleanor had always seen in me. The storm had passed, and I was still standing, stronger, wiser, free.